Hello, so welcome to the Booksellers Frankfurt Insights panel, part of a series that Frankfurt has developed for its virtual fair this year, with the physical event not being able to take place this October. So I'm delighted that I've got a panel of experts on the UK publishing market. I am the editor of the Bookseller, which is the long-established print and digital magazine that covers the UK trade as well as the international markets, and we have a good overview of what's happening in the UK space, both in terms of book sales, but also in terms of rights deals and what's happening with publishers and agents and everybody else associated with the book business in the UK. So I'm going to introduce my my guests, and then we will kick off. So first up will be Hazel Kenyon, who is the director of the UK and Ireland book research business at Nielsen, which is a data company that we all rely on, including the Bookseller for our book charts, but publishers and agents more widely for their comprehensive data on the UK book retailing market. We also have Isabel Dixon, who is MD and Head of Books at Blake Friedman Literary Agency, and she is also current president of the Association of Authors Agents and a trustee of the Book Trade Charity. So perhaps she'll be able to give us a sort of general overview of how agents are feeling about the market at the moment, not just her and her own business. And then we have the token man, who is Will Atkinson, who is publisher and MD at Atlantic and has been there since late 2014. Before that, he was at Faber for it says here 130 years, but I don't believe that. Maybe it's a typo, maybe it's just 13 years. Atlantic won the Trade Publisher of the Year at the Independent Publishing Awards, which were awarded last week. And their crime book, My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oinken Braithwaite, won a Nibby, the crime novel of the year at the British Book Awards, which were awarded in June. So I'm going to start off with you, Hazel, from Nielsen, because one of the most difficult aspects of recording what was happening in the book business during the pre-lockdown, lockdown, and post-lockdown was the sort of missing 12-week window when we didn't have Nielsen data, so we couldn't tell. We had book charts, which Nielsen were able to supply us, but we didn't have numbers to go with those book charts. So we couldn't tell what the number one book was selling in relation to what it would have sold in previous years. And we couldn't tell what the market was doing in terms of how bookshops were weathering the storm or how sales were drifting to Amazon or to Waterstones.com. So we didn't have that sort of comprehensive overview that we rely on in trade, but also at the Bookseller. So I'm hoping that Hazel can provide us with a little bit of clues as to what happened during that period, but also an overall sense of how the market has bounced back during post-lockdown when bookshops have been able to reopen. So over to you, Hazel.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Philip. So, well, you've explained the situation we find ourselves in, but I wanted just to talk about the year, really, which has obviously been very, very strange indeed, and just divide it up into three segments. So looking at pre-lockdown, lockdown itself, and then post-lockdown. So, very much a year of 3/3, if you will. So just to put in context where we were in the book market before we entered into the lockdown phase. So as we started 2019, things looked very promising. We'd come off the back of a good, strong year with growth across both measures, value and volume. We'd seen a really good, strong year for non-fiction. Children's was doing well, fiction down slightly, but overall a good situation to find ourselves in. And as we entered into the first part of the year, the first month and a half or so, we saw the market in a good position. However, what we started to see in around the middle of February was the market start to decrease year on year across both measures in volume and value. And that was really before we'd been talking about book lockdown, as it were, in the UK, where the global pandemic news. The global pandemic was very much starting to impact consumer confidence. People weren't going out as much. People weren't buying books, but obviously weren't buying many other things as well. And so we found ourselves locked down at the end of March. And so we had data and reporting data up until the 21st of March. That final week, we did see a kick up in both fiction and children's. And this has been widely reported, but very much because of that rush to stock up on mainly colouring books. I've got 2 children myself, so I did go and buy lots of activity books, but also fiction. We saw a lot of fiction being sold in that last week. So then at that point, we did enter into lockdown, and we, as you said, weren't able to report the data. And so it was a 12-week period where we were unable to actually give volume and value figures. But what we did do was take a look at the data ourselves and say, right, what can we give the trade in terms of estimating what we think the market is doing at this point when we weren't able to report the actual figures. And so using data from other sources, we've got consumer data, which I'll mention later. We've got consumer data. We've got data from other territories. So we have BookScan in another 10 territories. And so, for example, being able to look at what's happening in the Italian market, which, as we all know, preceded where the UK was in terms of lockdown and then egress from lockdown, and what was happening in the trade. And so using that data source as well, what we did is put an estimate out for the market in that first week of down 27% in terms of volume change. Week on week, and actually not as bad as some of the other territories. So I know we're focusing on the UK here, but in Ireland we saw a 50% drop week on week. In some of the other territories like Italy and Spain, we saw 80% drop in the market measure that we have in those territories. And then obviously compared with somewhere like India or South Africa, where there was total full lockdown, people were not leaving their houses, there was no delivery, so there was no online shopping. We actually measured 0 book sales in those territories. So down 30% roughly. And so our market estimates then showed us that what we started to see was a market that was slowly recovering. There was a couple of weeks down, but then it would come up again. And again, these are based on our estimates. But what was very difficult to really understand was how much of that was coming from the change in consumer purchasing and how much was just due to supply chain logistics. We obviously heard about certain books being deprioritized in terms of delivery, the supply chain itself being able to fulfill orders, the switch of a lot of physical channels trying to bring online shopping to their consumers. So there was a lot going on. So it's not always easy to tell whether that was just a change in what the consumers were doing. But during that period, as Philip said, we had the rank chart. So we were still able to see what was selling. And so we did see home learning, fiction. So interestingly, a lot of crime thriller, general literary fiction selling quite well. The categories we saw performing slightly worse were science fiction, categories such as short stories, where perhaps these are categories that we would normally purchase through independent bookshops that obviously weren't able to sell at a trade at these times. We also had a look at our consumer data during this time. So what we did is carry out a tracker of 1,000 of UK adults, asking them what they were doing during lockdown. So we saw 2 in 5 adults were reading more. Unfortunately, not always buying more, because they were reading the books that they actually still had on their shelves, which still is reading. We saw more spare time, so allowing people to read. And what we actually measured was the fact that we saw the pickup of digital reading and online print purchases managed to counteract the drop we saw in physical bookshop sales. So telling us that during lockdown period, the market didn't fare too badly when we look at the numbers. So as we came through to post-lockdown, so obviously middle of June, the shops were reopening again, which was great. We really have seen a very positive picture with 12 out of 14 of the weeks in BookScan showing us year-on-year increases. We're also seeing growth across a number of different categories, and obviously the children's conference is happening at the same time at the moment, the Bookseller Children's Conference, and listening to what Jackie and Kira are reporting in terms of the children's market. So that's been doing well since lockdown was released. Some of the categories we are seeing struggling, so travel for obvious reasons. There are other categories. Some textbook categories are not doing so well, and also we're seeing some categories such as, say, fine arts or travel writing that actually are down just because the previous year there was a big title, or maybe there was a book linked to an event such as the Van Gogh exhibition at the Tate. We haven't seen the sales this year, obviously, because there's not been the same sort of event link. So some categories are just down because of last year they were doing particularly well. That's not been replicated. So it's a normal ebb and flow of the market, really. I suppose the message from me is that we don't really see sort of any particular change in consumer purchasing due to lockdown. People are continuing to purchase in the way they always did, but maybe more so in certain areas such as gardening, such as mindfulness, such as well-being, food and drink as well, also doing well. And I suppose that's it from me up until sort of year to date. I've got a lot more I could say at this point, but I'll pause to give everybody else a chance to speak.
Hey, so there was a figure that you put out at the Booksellers Marketing Publicity Conference, which was the estimate of what you thought the market dropped during that 12-week period when we didn't have high street bookshops. It's a sort of figure I've become obsessed with. I think it was 11%
Yeah.
by volume. So in a world without Waterstones, high street stores, in a world without independents, some supermarkets still trading, Amazon still trading, but in a world essentially without high street bookshops, the market goes down by just 11%. That seems extraordinary.
Yes, we found estimating. So in the initial weeks of the lockdown, we were able to estimate quite accurately what was happening. We found it, as I mentioned earlier, that there was a lot going on. So we found it very difficult to model what the changes in the market were. It didn't behave necessarily as we might expect. And obviously we know the answer, but we had to be very, careful about what we were doing was rigorous and the methodology was sound. And we actually found it very difficult to model at the latter half of the lockdown period, just because of the way in which the market was behaving. So there is an error on that 11%, but I think that gives us a good feeling for what was happening during that lockdown period. But you're right, I don't know if that's good or bad, because obviously what we've seen is some players, both in the retail and the publishing world, come out of this not too bad really, whereas for others it's really been a terrible time. And obviously we want a publishing industry that's diverse and all the players are taking part. So yeah,
I don't know whether it's good or bad either. I mean, in a sense it means publishers could survive in a world without Waterstones, but in another sense, who would want to? Because the books that people bought during that sort of lockdown period were very, very different and very kind of brand led compared to what they might buy when they're heading into a Waterstones or an independent bookstore. So swings and roundabouts. Will, over to you. Can you just give us a brief sort of overview of how you saw it at Atlantic? Because obviously you've got, as well as print book sales, you've got ebook and audiobook sales that you can talk about. But did you find that initial kind of uptick in the weeks leading up to the lockdown, and then a fall away, and then a kind of come back as bookshops started to look to reopen, or just got their online systems up and running properly?
I think, that is the pattern. Certainly we had a decent sales just leading up to lockdown, but it was decent, not, there wasn't some crazy uplift that I think they experienced in places like Australia, but it was kind of okay. But then when we were in full lockdown, our sales did drop, and they dropped by 30% on the physical side, not by 11%. And the reason for that is probably threefold. One, we didn't have that many books in supermarkets, so we did have one. Secondly, that the obviously Waterstones were shut, and so along with the indies. But also for us, the key to balancing a lack of physical bookstores is how good the Amazon supply chain is. And in those early days, they were concentrating on other stuff, gloves or toilet rolls or whatever, and therefore books were towards the back of the queue. So it took them really quite a long time for their supply chain to get up to anything which was particularly reasonable. And at the same time, obviously our own warehouse, Penguin-owned GBS, was also struggling. So the supply chain, it may well be that there were 2 out of 5 households were desperate to read, but certainly in terms of getting Atlantic books through that supply chain, it was very compromised. So through second half of March, all of April, and even into May, there were difficulties. Similarly, or at the same time, obviously export sales fell off a cliff. Australia, as it turned out, was actually not too bad on the sales side, but they were ordering extremely cautiously, and Europe basically locked up. So for those of us, most trade publishers where export is anywhere between 20% and 40% of our turnover, to lose that really overnight meant that other things had to compensate. And indeed, our ebook sales through March, through April, and indeed May went pretty bananas. They were either 2 or even 3-fold up at one point. They've now settled down, but it means that if, as a publisher, if you're creating demand for your newer titles, or you have strong backlists, those books were going very, very well, and certainly ebooks were flying at that time. So if you can't get your books through the Waterstones gates because either they're shut or they're struggling with their own supply chain, there are compensatory factors, and certainly what's happened in the last 2 to 3 months is certainly that our export sales have picked up. E has remained compensatingly high, and the Amazon supply chain, or the GBS Amazon supply chain, has settled down. What I would say is that again, it's really a flight to certainty. So our stronger backlist titles have done very well, and I'm sure if we have any brands, they would be doing well too. But also through April was too late, but certainly May and June was not a time to be publishing unknown writers of unknown track record. That was those publishing events simply collapsed, and we like many publishers, we took some books out, but not as many as others, I have to say. And certainly when we published Matthew Neal and A.N. Wilson in June, they did very well because there weren't many people publishing in June, and they were certain, they had there was certainty around them. They knew what Matthew Neal was writing, and A.N. Wilson has a significant track record. So the value of certainty only went up in those middle months. Whereas if you were trying to launch either new writers or non-fiction books that needed review, but weren't going to get them because they weren't well known, those publications failed. It didn't just like, oh dear, it was a bit bad, they just failed. So certainly and then obviously if you've moved a lot of publications forward either into this autumn or into next year, there is a concertina period of publishing which I think will last for about 18 months. So UK publishing has always been pretty competitive, but it's only going to get more so. So for us, there've been good things and bad things. I would say that our sales as of year to date in the UK are actually up about 6%, and our export sales are down, wait for it, about 6%, and our ebooks are considerably up, but not factorially, but certainly decent percentage-wise. So in terms of a small, medium-sized publisher on the rocky seas, they say there have been these compensatory factors, and of course, not behaving normally, and here we are, not behaving normally, is you can save quite a lot of money. So the lack of sales that we experienced through March, April, and May, and June in the physical side on the UK have been compensated for by not having lunch at the Ivory every day, which is obviously what we do.
Well, have export markets opened up a little bit now? Given we're talking Frankfurt, let's talk about Europe as well.
Germany is up. Our sales into Germany are up, and actually quite considerably now, and that's year to date. But the rest of Europe is a long way behind.
And are you seeing the same variances that we've seen in the UK, where lockdown has a sort of, in a sense, a delayed impact, but then isn't necessarily as bad as some people perceive it to be going into it?
Well, as a publisher, you want more people to be reading, and if 2 out of 5 households are reading more, it's a question of how they get hold of those books, and that is very complicated, because say sometimes there may well be, I've really been needing to read Proust Volume 3, and people finally get hold of it, and but it's been at the back of their shelves for the last 18 years. So there have been moments like that.
Never has the supply chain been so interesting.
Sorry, say again.
Never has the supply chain been so interesting.
No, or indeed so challenged. But as I say, I think as my lesson to myself is certainly if you create demand, there are readers out there who want to buy your books. And
Isabel, bringing you in here as an agent who's taking the long view with your authors, but also no doubt seeing authors launching into a a somewhat parched retail environment at the same time. I mean, going into it, what did you think would happen, and how did it differ in terms of the actual reality for you?
So I guess the first thing that we all had to do, and agents of course are responding to both what's happening from the author side and from the publisher side. So we were just rescheduling like crazy. All the books that had to be moved. That was obviously the first big conversations. What did we keep? Some things were too close at lockdown to move. And so, an indie publisher, literary book, Monique Roffey's The Mermaid of Black Conch, we simply had to cancel launch parties and all the events and send the book out there and hope it would have a long life, which it will have. But obviously those first weeks, months were very, very slow and hard for the kind of books that would normally be selling through indie bookstores. I had a couple of big brand name authors, Peter James and Sheila Flanagan, with May pub dates, always publish in May. And so that was a big conversation, and we decided to move both of those into July. Interestingly, on export, the books had already shipped to Australia, and we saw a much better performance even than they had already had in Australia, although they sold well in Australia in the past. The fact that the books reached the Australian shores first was interesting, and they both grew sales. Peter was on the bestseller list in Australia as well. Also, because they are both strong supermarket sellers, we saw a really, really good performance of those books when they came out in July, despite the fact that we couldn't rely on the author doing the kind of signings in person with long queues at the supermarkets we normally would get. Of course, the challenge throughout is the fact that those books that are not stocked in supermarkets, the sales in WH Smith's Travel, books that would have sold in trade paperbacks at airports or rail stations, that absolutely evaporating is hard. And we had to make decisions not just about the books that were out, but about what books we sent out on submission until times changed. So we were still submitting non-fiction and more commercial books all the way through lockdown, and we were getting good results, getting good deals. I decided to hold back a couple of titles that would have been ready to submit straight after London Book Fair, because I felt that the publishers we wanted to be in the ring needed to be sure of where they were going, and the more literary publishers and the indie publishers needed to know that the indie bookstores were open. So I waited until the bookstores had successfully opened before I made those submissions. And that's had a very good result. I mean, one of them was Graham McRae Burnett, who you reported the auction of and going to Saraband. But there was appetite from people for the trickier and more literary books once the bookstores, I think, were open and they could see actually it wasn't the complete disaster they might have expected.
So
it's an ongoing conversation. Sorry?
So you wanted bookstores to be open just to give publishers a sort of renewed faith that when they did open, those harder to sell, difficult to find books would sell through as they have done.
Yes, and I was on a call a while before the UK bookstores opened with German booksellers and European booksellers. I was invited onto a call with, along with Catherine Clark, my vice president, to listen to what the German booksellers were talking and saying about their reopening. And it was really heartening. It was such a heartening conversation. And I felt we needed that optimism for particular kinds of books to come back into the picture, and also for publishers to have a sense of their budget, a sense of what they could spend on a book. We're doing a lot of good deals in the UK and the US, and taking advantage of being able to reach people via Zoom and have conversations more readily with people who might not have picked up the phone or been on a Zoom call before, and just done things via email, and starting to see the translation rights markets as well pick up, although some are slower than others. Some have been harder hit, and in many of the translation markets, people are saying they're buying more local books, more books by local authors. But there is business to be done. We just have to be agile and flexible and consistent. You know, it's everything is has to be rethought, but based on the same quality that we always relied on.
Those first few weeks or even months of lockdown, when some publishers were delaying titles, others didn't seem to be. I mean, what was that like? Because obviously everyone comes at it from a slightly different point of view. And those publishers who didn't delay titles seem now to be a little bit more happy that they didn't do that, compared with those publishers who did, who maybe lost out on sales through supermarkets or through Amazon, and now are in a kind of concertina effect, as Will mentioned earlier. Was it hard dealing with a different array of publishers coming at it from different points of view with different arguments why you should do X and Y?
Yeah, I think everything. I mean, that's the beauty and the complexity of publishing, is that it's not a one size fits all business. We aren't selling baked beans or tires. Each book has to be taken individually according to what the author's strengths are, according to what the publisher can do. I mean, one of the difficulties also, which I perhaps should have emphasized, it's not just that the bookstore opening was part of the strategy, it was also the amount of editors and staff at publishing houses who were furloughed. And so if you were going to send a book out as well on submission, and you knew that several of the people who might want to buy the book were furloughed, that wasn't the best environment to give a book the best chance. So now it's good that, you know, the people are generally back at their workspaces, wherever those workspaces may be. But yeah, every book was a different conversation, and authors might have had a different view to what the publishers had. So there was a lot of that renegotiation. Things that should have been settled in the landscape again became movable pieces. And yeah, I hope we don't have to do too much of that again.
I'm not sure there are enough slots left in the year to do it, are there really?
Well, not this year, and next year is pretty full as well, I'm sure.
I'd like to have a quick question, because obviously this is for Frankfurt, and submissions are as important as books going out. Has your inbox, have the kind of number or type of submissions coming into your agency changed as a result? I mean, there was some speculation that authors would be able to write more as a result of lockdown, and then I saw lots of authors on social media saying, well, actually they found they can't write because, like the rest of us, they're so distracted by the continuing churn of events. So.
Yeah, I think that's also very much personality and personal circumstances, and one has to keep in mind, of course, people with little children have really, or other caring responsibilities, it's been incredibly hard time. And so I know that when whoever said on a conference that, you know, people were writing more and faster, got a lot of feedback from people going, you know, I'm not getting any time to write or think. And I think both those things are true. I can tell you that I have had at least 4 writers who have said that they have almost finished books, or indeed finished books during lockdown that they didn't know they were going to write before. But they either have very supportive partners both ways, or don't have children, or live alone. So everyone has a different scenario. I've certainly seen a faster turnaround among my own clients on balance of work and new projects. And it's always a torrent in the inbox in general for submissions. It's always a juggling act between us all. To the agents at Blake Friedman, we share the submissions if they're of interest. Something isn't for me, but it might be for someone else. And that's, yeah, it's been busy, and it's not slowing down.
I did have a brief email exchange with Peter James where we decided that the lockdown was a perfect time to hide a dead body, because obviously no one would notice. So
there's lots of crime ideas that will come out of this.
More importantly, have you noticed the content of those books changing yet? You know, has the COVID novel been written, or even the non-fiction piece about, you know, how pandemics?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people sending in things that respond to the COVID crisis, either in fiction or non-fiction, and some do it well and some don't. I mean, I was in the funny situation, my author Dion Meyer, South African crime writer, had already written a book, a standalone, called Fever, which takes the future set in future South Africa, where, you know, 80% of the country has been wiped out by coronavirus. So there was a surge of interviews going around the world asking about his research for it, which was done several years ago. But we don't specifically have any new COVID-based book on our list, though inevitably some authors have made decisions to slightly change settings of books they were already writing because they couldn't respond to change the plot line if it wasn't set pre-pandemic. And in other cases, I've had authors who've just very gently added in a few details here or there to indicate we're in a potential post-pandemic world.
Will, what's your view? Are readers ready yet for the COVID novel or the or the treatise on how we survive a pandemic? I mean, I've seen a few books rising up the charts on subjects like surviving working at home, but generally, I don't think anything big has broken through that's addressing it as yet.
Nothing big yet, but there are plenty of submissions around. Either rather straightforward ones about dealing with people in hospital, or there's something from Wuhan, all the kind of personalities around the Wuhan investigation, both in China and outside. So those things are circulating, and certainly people are having to move either their plots around or have had new ideas, which they have then taken over in terms of the current. The current plot might be thrown out and a new one suddenly thrown in. We've had a bit of that as well. Otherwise, it's also slightly a watching brief as well as when to publish it. If it's not immediate, then how far along the line do you go? Because long form publishing is slightly different from reporting and internet reportage and magazines and so what is the role of long form publishing within this pandemic? Some of it, of course, is straightforward investigation of what happened, but there'll be other things that can come along which need to be slightly more what a book does, which is context, a bit more investigation, and more narrative. Certainly we are only publishing one book next year so far, which has been sort of COVID driven, and that's a diary of lockdown in Rome, which is obviously the first one to go, but it's actually a very lovely tale of a family trying to do their best through day by day, and it's both frightening and charming, and human, which is rather lovely. But that is a book that wasn't remotely even dreamt up this time last year. So and we're publishing it very early on. So, but generally, both the level of acquisitions or books that we've had sent in haven't changed that much, to be honest. I mean, yes, there was a bit of we had people on furlough through April, May, and June, and everyone came back in July, and the certainly submissions went absolutely bananas in July in a way that they wouldn't necessarily normally, because things do calm down towards the second half of July. But that was really busy. Then August was actually quite quiet, and then here we are. It's been absolutely normal sort of pre-Frankfurt, bonkersness through September, and we're getting an extremely large amount of submissions now. So from that point of view, it is business as usual, because people are thinking, okay, we'll be publishing those books in 2022, 2023, when all this will be just feel like a bad dream. So in some ways, and then certainly running a publishing company has been odd, because the timings that you've had to manage are both extremely short term, i.e. what the hell are we going to do next week? Is the office open? Is it not open? Etc. Etc. But at the same time, you're trying to put together a decent publishing program for 2022 and 2023 in exactly the way that you would normally. So in some ways, it's been schizophrenic, and the whole furlough arrangement was rather played to this. It wasn't quite the right scene. It wasn't quite the right scheme for our industry, because, as I say, we had people. You have art directors designing covers, 12 months or 15 months in advance, and so whether the shops were open or not didn't make any difference at all to our business. So we've had to play a very short game and our normal long game. And so, in terms of where submissions fits into all that, actually, in some ways, it's been business as usual, with the odd tweak.
Yes, I just want to come back to you on the international markets, if I'm able to. I mean, did you see any irregularities in the way the UK performed compared to other markets that Nielsen covers, or other markets that you saw?
Not particularly, apart from Australia. and Australia's just had a complete bonanza and have done extremely well. I think they've only had one week this year that's been, Hazel would know more than me, but their book scan figures have been extraordinary, and therefore, and people have gone into local independent bookshops. Obviously, they have a strong independent sector, but also the department store, the big box stores have also done extremely well. And some of that's been about colouring books, but generally, Australia has way outperformed the UK, and others I think it's been too difficult to say, quite frankly. American needs Barnes and Noble in a way that we need Waterstones, and that has been they're a weak business and going into a difficult time. So that won't have helped. Again, it's all about whether Amazon can cope with the demand that Barnes and Noble can't provide. So otherwise, the only other place I know something about is Italy, and again they seem to play a rather similar game to us, and therefore once the bookshops are open, it was sort of okay there. But again, with Amazon as the compensating factor.
Hazel, what do the numbers tell you?
Yeah, well, very much as well as said. I mean, Australia, I think as well, were canny with some of their price promotions, and they really sort of played to what was happening with the consumer market, and the same in New Zealand as well. So really there was a couple of weeks of lockdown, a few weeks of lockdown in New Zealand, but things have kind of progressed and looking in a good place. But I think really you can kind of split territories up into sort of various regions, and I think Europe have all kind of performed in a very similar way with sort of a tick of V. So you see lockdown hits and then it slowly recovers, and then once bookshops open and the physical market is then the physical bookshops are open, and then we see a recovery, and some have sort of overshot and others are sort of catching up level. And then obviously, as I mentioned previously, you've got India and South Africa, which went to absolutely zero, nothing at all, and they're in slow recovery. But then you look at somewhere like Brazil and Mexico. I mean, for the Brazilian bookshops, this was just one crisis on top of another, and they were already operating with their backs against the wall. And so you've seen very much there. You've seen the drop off in sales, but the recovery is just painful to watch, and that's going to be a long time coming, I think. So I think depending on I mean, it all came down depending on how the lockdown was managed, and obviously, how the online channels were behaving. Again, as Will was talking about earlier with the supply chains. I mean, for some of these bigger countries, you look at US, you look at Brazil and stuff. It's just nigh on impossible to get books to certain areas, I should imagine.
And with book sales having performed so strongly since, a bit before Super Thursday, but definitely since Super Thursday, with the market up kind of year on year each week and increasing, do you think we're having an early Christmas in the sense that people are buying their books early because they're worried about a future lockdown? Or is it, as you say, sort of a bit of catch up?
I mean, from me, I would say, and you're talking mini Super Thursday, you're not talking actual Super Thursday. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to see, but I think people, as with everything, if you're starved of something for a little while, you then go all out, and it's like anything. People have been desperate to see friends and go to pubs, and so we've all gone a bit crazy. And I think probably there's an element of that with book sales. But I think if we look at what we've got coming up between now and Christmas, if we look at the way the book trade has responded, and the way you've got independents now very much trying to diversify their routes to their consumers, a lot getting very much more savvy about their online retailing. I like to think that with the content that we've got coming, and the products we've got coming, and the way that the market is advertising to consumers, I like to think we're going to see a real uptick in Christmas, as we do normally. And if we look at sort of the run up, so Christmas kicks off sort of middle of November, and then for those sort of 4 weeks, we see a market that basically sort of sits at we're going to hit about £40 million in a week in about middle of, or towards the end of November, and then each week 50 million, 60 million, 70 million and 80 million until you get that big Christmas week. And that's what we normally see. And I think all signs are pointing to that same trajectory. And I think having this sort of kick up with our mini Super Thursday at the beginning of September, our double kick up again then in October, I'm hopeful that we're going to see a good Christmas and some good sales at the end of the year.
Will, are you seeing the same sort of prospects for Christmas? I don't know what Atlantic's got in its goodie bag for this year, but I expect you've got your money riding on a couple of titles.
Always some runners and riders, aren't there? We've had a very, very good September, and it's as a publisher, you always want a good September because you feel you've got the momentum going into the season, and therefore I'm pretty optimistic. There's some good books around. So obviously some that have been moved from June and July into the autumn. We've moved some of our stronger non-fiction paperbacks because we needed Waterstones to be open to sell those. And obviously I'm still concerned about Waterstone City Centre stores performing. They really need to get back up and running for us to have for some of our publishing to do well, because that is about browsing and discovery, and they're books that have sold well in hardback, but are not they're not brand. So yes, we know that Amazon will compensate for what Waterstones can't do, but there's an extra bit that Waterstones open. Those big box city centre Waterstone stores really need to be open, I think, for us to have a decent Christmas. And the indies, I think, have yet again learned new tricks, and their websites and they really have discovered there's an internet this year, and so with yes, there's customer loyalty to Amazon, but there's also customer loyalty to your own environment, and therefore we know that indie bookshops that had decent websites and were delivering during a lockdown, I think will play really, really well. So the independent sector, I think, is in some ways it's been what hasn't killed them, will make them stronger. So yes, that again, there always is compensating things, but we don't have ebooks for Christmas. No one's still giving ebooks for Christmas, and audio as well. So I'm really pleased with what's happened in my company over the last 6 weeks, but I am anxious about big box Waterstones. And export, I think, will again continue to improve, which is great. But you want to perform well in your home market.
I think one of the interesting things about what's up ahead between now and Christmas, of course, is also the entry of bookshop.org to the market, and the fact that indies will be able to sell via that agglomeration and with a real sense of community and social purpose as well, with the affiliate programs. So people who do want to support the local indie bookstore can do that, and will see some gain and some community gain in a sense from that. So that's quite an exciting development for the market here, I think.
I think it's another lockdown, then absolutely, yeah. I think bookshop.org could be a lifesaver for some.
Yeah, and I think, but I think Will is absolutely right that indies had already raised their game, lots of them, in terms of websites and direct selling, and there is that the question of the rise in reading on the whole, I think, has been one of the positive things, and like reading rose at the Second World War and remained after the war, we would hope that would be constant. Also because when you're locked down with your family and you're stuck in a house together, you can't just sit in front of a TV or screens all the time, and we're all tired of screens because we use screens for our work. And a book provides a very intimate, comforting, private space for you to escape in, even if you're sitting in the same room as other people.
And
I need more than a colouring book, that's for sure.
More, yes, yeah. I mean, I also just think in terms of the other things that have come out of it, of this period, is the fact that we're doing this, all of us in our different places. This is going to be part of, virtual Frankfurt Book Fair. I have been able to, in my poetry life and my agenting life, be on launches in South Africa with writers in Nigeria, with people in India, with people in America, and also the immense gain for people with disabilities in terms of accessibility. So many people have said, we've been calling for this for so long. How can we make events more accessible? We've seen festivals convert really well. in making these things available. And I've seen really innovative ways of selling tickets, people paying not just via donating. I've prepared to pay £20 for a Black Writers Salon ticket, and all the writers on it got paid. And also seen indie publishers and booksellers using it, using the chat function to put in links to being able to buy direct from indie bookstores. So you try and replicate the sales channel via the events as well. And I think this is all played in as well into the question of inclusivity and diversity as a whole, which is a very important growth area in terms of awareness, a subject we've been talking about for some time, but really came into much sharper focus with the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement earlier this year.
Yeah, COVID has catalyzed a lot of good change, hasn't it? As well as a lot of the sort of negative and bad stuff. I mean, it's changed our focus, enabled us to do things that we would never have dreamt of before, and woken us up to different ways of interacting with each other and selling books and speaking and launching authors. I think it's been very positive from that point of view. As well, I just wanted to talk about, because this is obviously a Frankfurt webcast. What's your feeling around selling rights? Because obviously that would be your main focus during this period, getting ready for Frankfurt and then attending the fair and then kind of working out what types of books you need to sell for next year in 2022, really. So is that still happening? Is the mood still the same? Are the meetings still coming through? Are the submissions still there, or has there been disruption to that too?
So I'm a self-confessed Frankfurt junkie, a rights selling junkie. This would have been my 26th Frankfurt. I've never missed one.
Wow.
So I'm in deep mourning. I actually also realized I picked up a Hessischer Hof pen that I have, which I'm in mourning about hearing that the Hessischer Hof is going to have to close as well. So I mean, really, really tough. And I feel for the city, and I feel for the fair, and I feel for everybody involved in this kind of exhibition. And yeah, we are. There's no doubt that there's a whole tribe of people in publishing who are heartbroken and going to miss that whole amazing week. But we're all resilient and flexible, and we care about the books that we're selling, and the stories can travel. So that's what we're setting about doing. It's taken a little while to work out how people are going to manage it, because there was so much uncertainty for so long. I think everyone is agreed that you can't do anything like the number of meetings you would at a Frankfurt Book Fair, and you can't squash everything into 1 week, and nor is there a need to. We're very grateful. There's a platform. We're all using the platform to upload information and to share information. And had there been a safe physical fair, we would have been there. But all of those uncertainties and then the certainties of the situation we're in change that. So most people have already, as we have at Blake Friedman, started our meetings with foreign publishers already over the last couple of weeks. So we're seeing scouts, seeing publishers, and we'll continue to do so in a longer horizon. I kind of see this as a ultra marathon run, a bit slower than that very intense adrenaline high of the Frankfurt week.
Do you think it changes the nature of the deals you do or the types of books? I mean, was it too early to say that yet?
I will miss. There are things you'll miss. You agents are adept at bringing together the buzz and connecting publishers. I can't have a Zoom meeting and spot another publisher. The German publisher. I'm sitting here with the Norwegian publisher, and I say, come over and speak to them about the author, and you get people selling to each other. It's not just unidirectional or just in two parallel lines. In Frankfurt, you get the whole hive, and that actual audible buzz of the fair is what we're going to miss. That can't be replicated. I think fairs are definitely part of our future when they can be done safely. This is not a way we want to replace things forever, but it may give us better tools to keep a consistent communication with new skills we've learned via the technology.
as ever, it's the deals that don't get done and the books that don't get sold that we will never know about.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is, the flight to certainty is the phrase that Will used earlier, and we already had the polarization of the, of the certain thing, and of certain books where it's almost like publishers wait for someone to offer and then all pile in at times. And it's, we need the catalysts of, lots of deals across a broad spectrum of authors. Most agents, we have a broad list. And we do worry about the ones that aren't necessarily under 30, not necessarily debuts, and not writing on some hot and hooky topic, but could be the great classics of the future. So we have to work on making sure those are read and bought as well.
Will, those are the ones for you.
Yeah, no, I made a note.
Good. We can talk afterwards.
Well, what will your Frankfurt week look like? Will it just look like any other normal week in publishing, or will you do something Frankfurtery?
I'll have a fairly normal week, I think, but certainly many of my people will have very, very busy weeks. It's a more diffuse experience. As I say, we've been selling or buying probably for a week or even two. Certainly, our rights guide came out about 10 days ago, and we've been going ever since. And I think that'll go all the way through October. I mean, there's a reason that Frankfurt and London exist at certain times of the year, and you prepare for them, and therefore, our selling is timed around that, both in terms of the physical side and indeed the right side as well. So it's the actual week of Frankfurt is like a pivot. At the same time, we're be selling buying 2 or 3 weeks before, and then 2 or 3 weeks after. So those major sellers and those major buyers will, as I say, are busy all the way through October. But it is a more diffuse experience, and it's absolutely right. What Isabel's saying is that this is quite unilateral, and you'll miss the multilateral when the Norwegian publisher is talking to the French publisher, and that is the magic of Frankfurt. And that's why we go to, apart from the very functional thing of having meetings and selling to people or talking to people you talked to 6 months ago or so. But like Zoom and against physical, the technical and operational side you can do on Zoom is everything else, which either needs nuance or a group of personalities. That is very, very hard.
And the dancing. Don't forget the dancing. Not so easy on the Zoom.
Well, demonstrate, Isabel. Come on.
Not today.
Well, I just want to conclude with you because in a sense you nailed it at the beginning when you said that we entered 2020 in such good health after a good 2019 and after a relatively kind of long period now of sustained growth in print book sales. Putting your sort of magician's hat on in a way, where do you think we will end up at the end of 2020, just in terms of print book sales and books sold through physical bookstores and via websites and Amazon? Are you optimistic that we will end up with another year of growth, albeit we have that missing 12-week period to figure out how we deal with? But are you thinking, overall it will be a positive picture?
I think so. I mean, obviously it's been just such a hard year. We've had a period where people couldn't go into bookshops, and we mustn't forget that that's going to hit us, and we're all going to feel that. However, I think it's shown us that the bounce back has just been glorious to witness. People going in and watching those channels re-emerge from lockdown, seeing people buying books in great numbers through the channels. I think probably what we'll see is maybe we've held our own. Whether the post-lockdown period is enough to offset that period of lockdown, we'll find out. But I think probably what we'll see, volume pretty flat. We're going to see a hit in value just because non-fiction is our biggest value book out there, category out there, and we did see sales of those get hit during the lockdown. So I think probably value down, volume flat would be a good place. And I think if we can do that and come out, we can come out with our heads held high and go, well, actually look at the resilience of the trade. And obviously, as we go into the end of this year and the beginning of next, whether we are going to, God forbid, face more lockdowns which impact the retail sector, I think we're in a better position to deal with that. You know, we all see the diversification of the routes to market. So I think, yeah, this year we can hold our heads up high no matter what we end up with. But I think things will probably not look too bad. That's my outlook.
There was the worst moment for me during lockdown was when Bloomsbury announced that it projected that print book sales would fall by 75%, and they had to raise an emergency. Well, I think it was at 8 million to get through it.
They had to revise that.
Literally, I think everyone's jaws hit the floor, including my bosses, who sort of sent me an email saying, "Well, this doesn't look very good." And almost from that moment, everything kind of turned out completely differently, in a sense, in a context of, you know, a market that was clearly going to be troubled and disrupted. It was not as bad as a 75% drop in print book sales, thank God. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's a good positive moment to conclude this Frankfurt webcast. Just to mention that by the time this is broadcast, the Future Book Conference, our big publishing conference for the year, will be in full swing in terms of announcing speakers and themes for 2020. I suspect COVID and the future of publishing will form, and the future of agenting even will form a major part of that. So do look out for various ticket offers that my colleagues will be sending around, and do attend our virtual event, because it's very important for us that we keep the conversation going and keep those conferences alive. So for now, thank you to my panelists, Isabel, Hazel and Will, and here's to a successful Frankfurt Book Fair, Fakefurt as it's called, a successful Frankfurt virtual book fair this year, and look forward to returning in October 2021 with our masks on and in person. So thank you for watching.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.